Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 214 of the Rock Show. How you doing, Rob?
Pretty good today.
Okay, I'm Rocker Mike, for those who don't know, and that's Rob Rossi, bartender legendary. How you doing?
Pretty good today.
All right, good,
What
good.
a few couple of weeks, man. St. Patty's, all kinds of
Yeah.
stuff.
Oh, yeah, I'm still recovering from that weekend.
Do you go to the do you ever make it to the drunk show on the water?
No, I did not. I didn't actually. I partied like the 3 days before St. Patty's, and then actually on St. Patty's, I was so shot I couldn't do nothing.
Oh my god.
Oh, it was insane, insane. But today is episode 214, and we're talking about the legendary artist, I think, Tom Waits. He's a guy that over the years I've learned to appreciate. I have to admit, many years ago when I first heard him, I didn't care for him much. He's still a bit of a tough pill to swallow, but he's grown on me over the years as a great songwriter. He's also, I mean, he's Grammy winning, and he's also a lot of his songs have been covered by a wide variety of people, from Bruce Springsteen to the Ramones. Have covered his music. He's very well respected in rock circles, jazz circles, singer-songwriter circles. I mean, and he's done acting too. Okay, so the guy, yeah, and he's always very interesting in whatever acting role he's in. Strange guy, kind of mysterious. I think that his background is not well known, which is why I kind of wanted to do this show. I mean, I learned quite a few things even just doing the research. So, did you realize he was a California guy?
Nah.
I always thought he was an East Coast guy. I always thought he was an East Coast guy, but he was actually born Thomas Allen Waits on December 7th, 1949, in Pomona, California. Okay, that's where he was born. Now, he has one older and one younger sister, so he's a middle kid, and he comes from a Scotch Irish and Norwegian background. His father was Scotch Irish, Jesse Frank Waits, originally from Texas, and his mother, Alma Fern, was from Oregon, and she had a Norwegian background. Now, Alma was actually a regular church-going woman, and basically managed the household. She didn't work. And Jesse, the father, taught Spanish at a local school. But, they had a typical kind of 1950s upbringing, except his father had a drinking problem. Basically, he was picked on a little bit, bullied a little bit as a kid. But he was always musically inclined. He learned how to play the bugle and guitar and the ukulele at a very young age. So during the summers, he used to visit his mother's side of the family in a town called Gridley and one other town called Marysville. And he later recalled that it was his uncle's voice that he admired. He had a very gravelly kind of voice, and that's the voice that Tom Waits kind of has.
He was inspired by Bob Dylan, right? Bob Dylan was.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, everybody was at the time. Yeah, absolutely. But he took things to a totally different level than Dylan.
Okay.
So in 1959, when Tom was 10, his parents got separated, and his father moved away from the family home, which was a very traumatic experience for the 10-year-old Tom Waits. Alma, his mother, took the children and relocated to Chula Vista, which is a suburb of San Diego. His father used to visit the family there and would sometimes take the kids down to Tijuana for a little, afternoon trips and things like that. In nearby San Diego, Waits would.
What's the father Spanish?
He was from Texas. Okay.
Might have been Mexican since he was
No,
teaching Spanish.
he had a Scotch Irish background, but a lot of Texas people, the Hispanic stuff is in the food and all that. It's just Mexican influences. And I guess Tijuana probably in the 1950s was not as crazy as it became later on.
Yeah.
You probably could take kids there. Now you would not want to take your kids there. It's got a totally different vibe. He basically attended a community school, okay, and he had fronted a band in school, kind of like a school band called the Systems, and which he described as like white kids trying to do black Motown music. He enjoyed stuff like Ray Charles, Wilson Pickett. He was also into country music, including Roy Orbison and Bob Dylan, of course, as you mentioned before, later became a big inspiration. In fact, Waits used to write Bob Dylan lyrics on the walls of his room.
Wow.
Yeah. So when he was 15, he recalls a story that he snuck in to see Lightning Hopkins, the legendary blues guy. He said it was an amazing show. Every time he opened his mouth, he had that orchestra of gold teeth, and I was devastated. He walked through a door and slammed the door behind him, and on the door it said, "I swear to God, keep out. This room is for entertainers only." And I knew at that moment that I had to get into show business as soon as possible. So he also saw James Brown in 1962 in San Diego and said it was indescribable. I mean, it was incredible. He said it was like putting your finger in a light socket. And also, it was really like seeing Mass. He said it was like a religious experience for him. By the time he was in Hilltop High School, he later related he was kind of an amateur juvenile delinquent. He was interested in all kinds of mischief and breaking the law. He later described himself as a rebel against the rebels, kind of like having he was against the hippie subculture that was hitting at that time.
This guy looked like a guy that was beating up hippie. Look at him right here. Look at that.
Yeah. No, he's no hippie. He was no hippie. But he would basically.
He looks like a bit like English Bob.
A little bit, yeah.
Like a young Bob.
Yeah, a little bit, like an American version of him. Yeah.
Yeah, like right there, he looks like one.
That's true. That's true. What he was into besides the music was the beat generation and stuff like William Burroughs, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg. He was into that kind of literature. In 1968, at the age of 18, he dropped out of high school. That was his senior year. And basically spent a lot of time watching Alfred Hitchcock Presents and The Twilight Zone, like all of us. Another influence was the comedian Lenny Bruce, who at that time
how is that an influence? Was that because his lyrics and shit? He would write funny shit or something?
Yeah, well, it wasn't really funny. Lenny Bruce was funny, but it was really he was kind of like when Howard Stern would do things and take it to a point where you're like, oh God, he's going to get arrested or he's going to get in trouble. I mean, Lenny Bruce was actually arrested for obscenities many times.
Oh, I can see that.
And he had a very bad drug problem as well. There's a great movie starring Dustin Hoffman called Lenny that everybody should check out if you want to know about Lenny Bruce. Really was a tragic guy, but I could see how Waits would be into him because he was kind of a rebel.
Yeah. Is that what you say he was a hard pill to swallow? Do you have like what was his stick?
You talk about Lenny Bruce or Waits?
Waits. Yeah, you say
Wait. Yeah, I when I said he was a hard pill to swallow, his music is very, very deep, and you really got to put time into it, which I don't mind artists like that. Some people do. Some people don't want to sit there and really listen and figure out what he's doing. I could do that, but even with that, even because I like that kind of stuff sometimes, his approach, even he has like a very raspy voice, deep raspy voice, and the music can be very slow at times. Not all of it. I mean, he's experimented with different sounds over the years. I mean, he has dozens of albums. It's just incredible. I mean, he's been around for 50 years. Okay.
Yeah.
So what he did for as a teenager is he worked at a pizza restaurant, and he kind of like would work sometimes in a diner to raise some money. And whenever he had time, he would like write lyrics and, you know, poetry and things like that. Little snippets of, he would take snippets of dialogue he heard from people, okay, like in a diner, write it down. And he also worked as a forestry service fireman for 3 years, okay, and served in the Coast Guard. So he's really all over the place. He enrolled in the Chula Vista Southwestern Community College to study photography and considered that as a career at one point. But he really always would fall back on his musical interests. He took piano lessons, and he began frequenting the clubs around San Diego, being drawn to the folk scene in the 60s. Okay. Which gets the, you know, obviously the Dylan influence and others. His early music career would start in 1969. He was hired as an occasional doorman for the Heritage Coffee House, which held regular performances from folk musicians. He also began to sing at the Heritage. Okay. His set initially consisted largely of Dylan covers and Red Sovine's Phantom 309's famous song. In time, he performed his own material as well, often parodies of country songs or bittersweet ballads influenced by his failed relationships. These included early songs like The Old 55 and I Hope That I Don't Fall in Love with You. These were songs he would record later. As his reputation grew, he played at other San Diego venues, supporting acts like Tim Buckley, Sonny Terry, Brownie McGee, and his friend Jack Tempchin. Now, aware that San Diego offered little opportunity for this career to go anywhere, he began traveling up to Los Angeles to play at the Troubadour in West Hollywood. It was there in the autumn of 71 that Waits came to the attention of Herb Cohen, who signed him to a publishing and recording contract. The recordings that were produced under that recording agreement were eventually released in the early 1990s as The Early Years and Volume 1 and Volume 2. In early 72, after quitting his job at Napoleon's pizza place to concentrate on his songwriting career, Waits moved to an apartment in Silver Lake, Los Angeles, which was kind of a poor neighborhood, a Hispanic neighborhood, but it was also known as a bohemian, artistic kind of place where a lot of artists and writers and musicians lived. He continued performing at the Troubadour in West Hollywood and there met David Geffen, who gave Waits a recording contract on Asylum Records. Okay. Jerry Yester was chosen to produce his first album, with the recording session taking place in Hollywood's Sunset Sound Studios. The resulting album, called Closing Time, was released in March of 73. Although it attracted little attention and it didn't sell, his biographer, Barney Hoskins, noted that Closing Time was broadly in step with the singer-songwriter school of the early 70s. Waits had wanted to create a piano-led jazz album, although Yester had produced its sound in a more folk-oriented direction. Tim Buckley would cover the song Martha on his album Sophronia later that year. And the Eagles' recording of Old 55 on their album On the Border brought Waits further money and recognition, although he regarded their version as a little antiseptic. He didn't care for that version too much.
Well,
but it got him some cash.
So, but he started pretty quickly. How did he get? Do you think he get the connections from the club? Is that the why he got?
Exactly. Yes, right. He would meet people through his club appearances. Obviously, you know, a small scene like that, you're gonna know everybody.
I guess so, yeah.
You know, it's like that in New York. It's you know, it's like that everywhere. Especially if it's a small scene, you'll see the same people, and then they'll come up to you and they'll tell you their connections, and you network. You know,
Yeah, because him being 18 years old and pretty much getting a record like that right away, that's pretty impressive when you're 18-year-old.
Yeah, it wouldn't be released until years later, but you know, at least it was something. I mean, he was kind of holding his own, probably, you know, living very cheaply and, you know, holding his own, living in a cheaper neighborhood and stuff like that. So to promote his debut record, Waits and a three-piece band embarked on a U.S. tour where he was the supporting act for more established artists. He supported Tom Rush at Washington, D.C.'s The Cellar Door. He supported Danny O'Keefe in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He supported Charlie Rich in New York City, at Max's Kansas City. He played there early on. He also opened for Martha Reeves and the Vandellas in Michigan once. And also John Hammond in San Francisco. So quite a different range of artists there. He would return to LA in June of that year, feeling a little demoralized about his career. That month, he was the cover star of free music magazine called Music World. He began composing songs for his second album, and he also attended the Venice Poetry Workshop to try out his new material in front of an audience. Now, although Waits was eager to record this new material, Cohen instead convinced him to take over as a support act for Frank Zappa. And that was after also previously supporting Kathy Dalton. Kathy Dalton actually was opening.
He went on tours with them. He went on tour.
Yeah. Well, Kathy Dalton was on tour with Zappa, and Zappa's fans destroyed her, and they needed an opening act because she wanted to leave the tour. So Herb Cohen, who was sort of managing Waits at that point, okay, he got him to get on the tour with Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, which was an interesting lineup. Okay. Waits joined Zappa's tour in Ontario, Canada, but like Dalton, started having problems with the audience. Okay. While on stage, he was jeered. He was, you know, yelled at, cursed at. People threw shit at him. Fruit,
tomatoes.
Yeah, no, really, they hit fruit. They threw fruit at him. Okay, people used to actually do that. Okay, now he liked Frank Zappa. And he liked being on tour, but he said he was kind of intimidated by Zappa himself, and which I could see being a little intimidated. So Waits would move down to Silver Lake. He would move from Silver Lake to Echo Park, spending much of his time in downtown LA. In early 74, he continued to perform around the West Coast, getting as far as Denver. For his second album, Geffen wanted a more jazz-oriented producer, selecting Bones Howe for the job. Howe recounts his first encounter with the young artist. He said, "I told him I thought his music and lyrics had a Jack Kerouac quality to them, and he was blown away that I even knew who Jack Kerouac was. And I told him I also played jazz drums, and he went wild. Then I told him that when I was working for Norman Granz, Norman had found these tapes of Kerouac reading his poetry from the Beat Generation in a hotel room. And he told Waits he'd make him a copy of that cassette. That sealed the deal, getting him to work with him. He was impressed. So recording sessions for The Heart of Saturday Night, which is the second album, took place at Wally Hayter's Studio 3 on Cahuenga Boulevard in Hollywood in April and May of 74. With Waits conceptualizing the album as a sequence of songs about the U.S. nightlife, the album was far more widely reviewed than the first album, Closing Time, was. Okay, Waits himself later dismissed the album as very ill-formed, but he was trying to do something interesting.
Something different.
Yeah. So after recording The Heart of Saturday Night, Waits reluctantly agreed to tour with Zappa again, but once more faced problems with the audience. The kudos of having supported Zappa's tour nevertheless bolstered his image in the music industry and helped his career. In October of 74, he first performed as the headline act before touring the East Coast in New York City, and that's where he met Bette Midler, became friends with her, and he would have an off and on romantic relationship with her as well.
That's such a weird thing.
Bette Midler?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, who hasn't had an off and on thing with her, right? I mean,
Yeah.
she was known for her affairs. So, back in L.A., Cohen suggested Waits produced a live album. To this end, he performed 2 shows at the Record Plant studio in front of a small invited audience to recreate the atmosphere of a jazz club. Again, produced and engineered by Howe. All his future Asylum releases, by the way, that would be produced by Howe. Okay, the next one was called Nighthawks at the Diner. That came out in October of '75. The album cover and title were inspired by Edward Hopper's Nighthawks movie from 1942, film noir kind of movie. He followed this with a week's residency at the Reno Sweeney nightclub, an off-Broadway style club in New York City. In December, he appeared on the PBS concert show Soundstage. From March to May of '76, he toured the United States, telling interviewers that the experience was tough and that he was drinking too much. But in May, it happens. In May, he embarked on his first tour of Europe, performing in London, Amsterdam, Brussels, and Copenhagen. On his return to Los Angeles, he joined his friend Chuck E. Weiss, moving into the Tropicana Motel in West Hollywood, which had an established reputation in rock music circles. Visitors noted his 2-room apartment there was heavily cluttered. Waits told the LA Times that you almost have to create situations in order to write about them. So I live in a constant state of self-imposed poverty. Interesting, right?
Yeah, look at this picture.
Yeah, it's probably right in his room.
That gotta be his room. That's probably what they put in the time.
Yeah, exactly. In July of '76, Waits recorded Small Change. Again, that was produced by Howe. It was recalled as a seminal episode in his development as a songwriter, the point when he became completely confident in his writing. Okay. The album was critically well received and was his first release to break into the Billboard Top 100 list, peaking at number 89. Small Change, according to Bowman, made it clear that Waits had evolved into a master storyteller, reflecting the influence of crime noir writers such as Dashiell Hammett and John MacDonald. Arguably his first masterpiece, the album featured exquisite piano ballads such as Tom Traubert's Blues. That's one of my favorites from him. And the piano has me drinking. Excuse me, the piano has been drinking, not me. That's the name of the song. The word jazz of pasties and a G string, another great song, and the tour de force tenor sax accompanied on Step Right Up. He started receiving a lot of attention with this album. He was profiled in Newsweek, Time Magazine, Vogue even, and the New Yorker wrote articles about him. And he started to get this like small cult following, which would grow obviously over the years. And he's still at, I still think he's kind of like at a cult level, even though I'm sure he's Grammy award winning, all that, but he still kind of has this small core of fans that are totally devoted to him.
And you know what it is? For a guy that's such a Californian guy, he spent a lot of time in New York, right?
He did. Well, he would move there later on. He would move there. Okay, and I think he absorbed New York City into him. He kind of had like a love-hate relationship, which we'll talk about a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, back in L.A., he encountered some various problems. One female fan recently escaped from a mental health institution in Illinois, began stalking him and lurking outside his Tropicana hotel apartment. In May '77, Waits and close friend Chuck E. Weiss were arrested for fighting with the police in a coffee shop. They were charged with 2 counts of disturbing the peace, but then were acquitted after the defense produced 8 witnesses who refuted the police officer's account of the incident. In response, Waits sued the LAPD and 5 years later got $7,500 for that. Okay. In July of August '77, he recorded his 4th studio album called Foreign Affairs, and Bob Alcivar had been employed as its arranger. The album included I Never Talk to Strangers, which was a duet with Bette Midler, with whom he was still kind of intimate with. She appeared with him at the Troubadour to sing the song. The next day, he repaid the favor by performing at a gay rights benefit at the Hollywood Bowl that Midler was involved with. Foreign Affairs was not as well received by critics as its predecessor, Small Change, but unlike Small Change, it failed to make the Billboard Top 100. That year, he also got involved with singer-songwriter Ricky Lee Jones. Okay, he was romantically involved with her. And their work and styles kind of influenced each other. In October 77, he returned to touring with the Nocturnal Emissions. It was on this tour that he began using props on stage, in this case, a street lamp. Again, he found this tour kind of exhausting. In March of 78, he embarked on his second tour of Japan. During these years, Waits sought to broaden his career beyond music. He befriended actor and director Sylvester Stallone and made his film debut as a drunken piano player in Stallone's Paradise Alley. I don't know if you remember that.
I remember that.
Yeah.
It looked like that was him.
Yeah, he was very young. He was very young at the time. He wasn't even 30. He also met Paul Hampton and began writing a movie musical, although the project never went anywhere. Another project he began at this time was a book about entertainers of the past whom he admired. So he was interested in writing books as well.
Yeah.
Between 78 and 80, starting in July of 78, Waits began the recording sessions for Blue Valentine. That's his next album. Partway through the sessions, he replaced his musicians and created a less jazz-oriented sound for the album. He switched from a piano to electric guitar as his main instrument. For the album's back cover, Waits used a picture of himself and Jones leaning against his car, which was a 1964 Ford Thunderbird taken by Elliot Gilbert. Per Bowman, Waits gradually began writing about junkies and prostitutes instead of Skid Row drunks. In songs such as Christmas Card from a Hooker in Minneapolis and Red Shoes by the Drugstore, his writing became more and more vivid, compact, and complex. From the album, Waits' first single was a cover of Somewhere from the West Side Story movie, and it failed to chart. Okay. For his Blue Valentine tour, Waits assembled a new band, and he also had a gas station built as a set for his performances. His support act on the tour was Leon Redbone. In April, he embarked on a European tour there, making television appearances and press interviews. In Austria, he was the subject of a short documentary, and from there he would fly to Australia for his first tour of that country before returning to LA in May of 78. Waits was dissatisfied at that time with Elektra, who had bought up Asylum Records. He felt that they lost interest in him and was more interested in commercial artists like the Eagles, Linda Ronstadt, or Queen, which was signed to the same label. After a phone call with their mutual friend, Chuck E. Weiss, Waits told Jones, Chuck E's in love. This was the inspiration for her song, Chuck E's in Love, which reached number 4 in the singles chart, straining her relationship with Waits. Okay, he got kind of offended that she took what he said and made a song out of it. Okay. Their relationship was further damaged by Ricky Lee Jones' heroin problem. Okay. Waits joined Jones for the first leg of her European tour, but then ended his relationship with her after that. Her grief at the breakup was channeled into the 1981 album Pirates, and in September, Waits moved to the Crenshaw Boulevard to be closer to his father before deciding to relocate to New York City. He initially lived in the Chelsea Hotel before renting an apartment on West 26th Street. On arriving in the city, he told a reporter that he just needed a new urban landscape. He says he's always wanted to live there in New York, and it's a good working atmosphere for him. He considered writing a Broadway musical based on Thornton Wilder's Our Town. A rotoscoped Waits performed The One That Got Away in the music video Tom Waits for No One. Waits spelled like his name. Okay, that came out in 1979. He became associated and acquainted with Francis Ford Coppola, the director. And he asked Waits to return to LA to write a soundtrack for his upcoming film called One from the Heart. Waits was excited, but kind of conflicted about the prospect. He said Coppola wanted him to create music akin to his early work, a genre that he was trying to leave behind.
Yeah.
And thus he characterized the project as an artistic step backwards. He nevertheless returned to LA to work on the soundtrack in a room set aside for the purpose in Coppola's Hollywood studios. This style of working was new to Waits, and he later recalled that he was so insecure when he started, he was sweating buckets all the time. Waits was nominated for the 1982 Academy Award for the original music score for that film.
That's pretty good, man. That's a pretty good honor.
Yeah, yeah. And he would be affiliated again later on with Coppola. We'll talk about that. Waits still contractually owed Electra Asylum another album, so he took a break from Coppola's project to write an album that he initially called White Spades. He recorded the album in June, and it was released in September as a different one. They changed the title, and that was called Heart Attack and Vine, which I think is one of his best records. The album was more guitar-based and had, according to Humphreys, a harder R&B edge than any of its predecessors. It broke into the top 100 album chart, peaking at number 96. Reviews were generally good. It's been called one of Waits' pinnacle achievements. One of its tracks, Jersey Girl, was recorded by Bruce Springsteen later on. Waits was grateful both for the revenue that cover brought him.
Yeah, that brought him a lot of money.
Yeah, and actually he liked Bruce Springsteen's songwriting, so he was honored that he would do it.
So, like, pretty much he had rights to his music, because if he was selling them to other people, then he was making money off the music, or whoever covered him was.
Yeah, he had the rights to his music, which was a good deal. Not everybody had that. And he did make a lot of money by having other people perform his songs. His own albums weren't, top 10 or anything like that, but they were, they were some of them were cracking the top 100. But someone like Springsteen covering your song at that time, that's going to make more money than your album.
Yeah, that's a home run,
Yeah, exactly. So while on the set of One from the Heart, Waits encountered Kathleen Brennan, a young Irish-American woman working as an assistant story editor. The two of them had previously met while Waits was filming the film Paradise Alley, when he had that small role. Waits would later describe this encounter with Brennan as love at first sight, and they were engaged to be married within 1 week.
Wow.
In August of 1980, they married at a 24-hour wedding chapel on Manchester Boulevard in the Watts section of L.A., before honeymooning in Tralee, a town in County Kerry, Ireland, where Brennan had family.
This guy's having a pretty good career so far.
Pretty good, I would say.
Making music.
Yeah, and he's only about 10 years into his career. Returning to L.A., Waits and Brennan moved into a Union Avenue apartment. Hoskins noted that with Brennan, Waits had found the stabilizing, nurturing companion he'd always wanted, and that she brought him a sense of emotional security he had never known before. At the same time, many of his old friends felt cut off after his marriage, and Waits said of Brennan, "She rescued me. Maybe I rescued her too. That's often how it works." Okay.
Are they still married?
I don't remember. I think so. Recording of Waits' One from the Heart soundtrack began in October of 1980 and continued until September of 81. A number of the tracks were recorded as duets with Crystal Gayle. Interesting. Waits had initially planned to duet with Bette Midler, but she proved to be unavailable. The film was released in 1982 to largely poor reviews. Waits makes a small cameo as a trumpet player in a crowd scene, and Waits' soundtrack album was released by Columbia Records in 1982. Waits had misgivings about the album, thinking it was overproduced, and thought that basically it kind of like removed him a little bit as from cult following to more mainstream. Okay, but not, it's not like a breakthrough record. But just by being associated with the film and doing the soundtrack and knowing Coppola, it gave him a lot of credit. So newly married and with his Electra Asylum contract completed, Waits decided that it was time to artistically reinvent himself.
I think he's still married to the same woman.
Yeah, he is, right? He's still married to her.
That's what I was looking up.
Yeah. He wanted to move away from using Howe as his producer, although the two parted on good terms. With Brennan, Kathleen Brennan, his wife, with her help, he began the process of firing Herb Cohen as his manager, with him and Brennan taking over the managerial responsibilities. He came to believe that Cohen had been swindling him out of money, okay? And he thought he should be a millionaire, and he turned out he had about $20 to his name. Waits credited Brennan with introducing him to much new music, most notably Captain Beefheart, who we love on this podcast.
Oh yeah, that's an excellent album.
Right, and you could hear, like, in some of his albums, you could get it, how he was listening to Beefheart. He later said that once you've heard Beefheart, it's hard to wash him out of your clothes. It stains like coffee or blood. She also introduced him to Harry Parch, a composer who created his own instruments out of everyday materials. Waits began to use images rather than moods or characters as the basis for his songs. So he was kind of reinventing himself with the help of his wife.
What's funny with him going with the whole Captain Beefheart, that's like a whole other connection to Frank Zappa and that whole thing. It's all coming full circle, if you look at it.
Good point. I mean, Beefheart and Zappa were good buddies, and they influenced each other. And being on tour with Zappa had to be an influence for him.
Yeah.
Even though he said he was intimidated by Zappa, but that big mustache could be intimidating, I'm sure. So, Waits would write the songs for Swordfishtrombones, that's the next album, during a 2-week trip to Ireland. He recorded it at Sunset Sound Studios and produced it himself. Brennan often attended the sessions and gave him advice. Swordfishtrombones abandoned the jazz sound characteristic of his earlier work, and it was his first album not to have a saxophone on it. And it was the first album to actually feature an instrument called the marimba, okay? When the album was finished, he took it to Asylum Records, but they declined to release it. Waits wanted to leave the label anyway. In his view, they liked dropping my name in terms of me being a prestige artist, but when it came down to it, they didn't want to invest a whole lot in me in terms of faith. Okay, so he was just kind of being used as like their avant-garde artist, but they never promoted him right. Chris Blackwell of Island Records learned of Waits' dissatisfaction with Asylum and approached him, offering to release the album Swordfishtrombones. Island had a reputation for signing more experimental acts such as King Crimson, Roxy Music, and Sparks. Waits did not tour to promote this album, partly because Brennan at the time was pregnant. Although unenthusiastic about the new trend for music videos, he appeared in one for the song In the Neighborhood, co-directed by Haskell Wexler and Michael A. Russ. Russ also designed the Swordfishtrombones album cover, featuring an image of Waits with Lee Kolima, a circus strongman, and Angelo Rosito, a dwarf. It's an interesting album cover.
Yeah.
It's got a circus muscle guy and a dwarf on the cover, too. John Parales in GQ magazine wrote that on Swordfishtrombones, Waits has made a breakthrough. He's found music as evocative as his words. Waits' grumble of a voice now bounces off a peculiar assortment of horns and percussion and organ and keyboards, as if he led a Salvation Army band into a broken-down Hong Kong disco. It's as if he's shifted from monologues to screenplays. According to David Smay, Swordfishtrombones was the record where Tom Waits radically reinvented himself and reshaped the musical landscape. New Musical Express named it the second best album of the year. I don't know what was the first, but it was the second. In 1989, Spin magazine named it the second greatest album of all time.
Wow.
Right? That's a big one right there. In 1983, Waits appeared in 3 more Coppola films.
Wow.
He was Benny, a philosopher running a billboard store in Rumblefish. Buck Merrill, that was the character's name in The Outsiders.
Yeah.
And he was the maitre d' in the Cotton Club.
Wow.
Okay. He later said that Coppola is actually the only film director in Hollywood that has a conscience. Most of them are egomaniacs and money-grubbing bastards. In September, Brennan gave birth to their daughter, Calezimone. Waits was determined to keep his family life separate from his public life and to spend much more time with his family spend as much time with his family as he could. With Brennan and their child, Waits moved to New York City to be closer to Brennan's parents and the Island Records U.S. office. They settled in a loft apartment very close to Union Square.
Wow.
He did find New York City life frustrating, but it allowed him to meet many musicians and artists. He befriended John Lurie of the Lounge Lizards, and the duo began sharing a music studio in the West Beth Artist Community Building in Greenwich Village. Do you remember that building?
That's where we went to interview the old dude.
Yeah, that guy Jack. Remember that was his building. He began networking in the city's art scene, and at a party, he met Jean-Michel Basquiat, okay, the famous Haitian painter.
Yeah.
He would also meet Jim Jarmusch, the famous director.
So this guy got a pretty good like between the movie career, like making movie appearance and music, he's making some bucks now, right?
You know, you have to admit he has a presence. There's just something about Tom Waits. He doesn't get big movie roles. He's not like he has almost cameos or a little bit more than that, but he doesn't get big roles. But what he brings to those scenes are very memorable. You know,
he's like a character actor.
Yeah, maybe even just basically like a cameo character.
Yeah.
You know, so starting in the mid '80s, Kurt Weill became an important influence on Waits' work. The biographer Bowman writes that Waits had become interested in Weill's late 1920s and 30s musical theater works. Weill's slightly off-kilter, stylized cabaret approach to melody, rhythm, orchestration, and musical narrative permeated much of Waits' subsequent work from that point. Waits did the soundtrack for the documentary Streetwise, which was about homeless kids in Seattle. It was another influence on the subjects of his next album called Rain Dogs, and that was recorded at the RCA studios in mid-'85. Musically, Waits called the album kind of an interaction between Appalachia and Nigeria. Excuse me. Keith Richards played on several tracks. Richards later acknowledged Waits' encouragement of his debut solo album, Talk is Cheap. Rain Dogs also marked Marc Ribot's debut as a session guitarist. He would play on many subsequent Waits albums after that. Jean-Baptiste Mondino directed a music video for Downtown Train featuring the old boxer Jake LaMotta. Okay. The song was subsequently covered by Patti Smythe in 1987 and later on by Rod Stewart, where it reached the top 5 in 1990. His version of Downtown Train is very different than Rod Stewart's. Okay. Rod Stewart's version is a very upbeat kind of, happier kind of song than what's on Rain Dogs. In 1985, Rolling Stone named Waits its Songwriter of the Year. Arian Berger wrote that with Rain Dogs, he dropped his bedraggled lounge piano act and fused outsider influences, socialist decadence by way of Kurt Weill, pre-rock integrity from Old Dirty Blues, the elegiac melancholy of New Orleans funeral brass into a singularly idiosyncratic American style. It's an interesting analogy, but it's actually correct. And if you think about everything he said right there, that's exactly what that music was on that record. In September of '85, his son Casey was born. Waits assembled a band and then went on tour, kicking it off in Scotland in October before proceeding around Europe and then the United States. He changed the set list for each performance, which most artists don't do. And most of the songs chosen were from his 2 Island albums. So he was really doing mostly recent stuff. Returning to the U.S., he traveled to New Orleans to act in Jim Jarmusch's film Down by Law. Jarmusch wrote Down by Law with Waits and Lurie in mind. The film opened and closed with songs from Rain Dogs. Jarmusch noted that Tom and I have a kindred aesthetic, an interest in unambitious people or marginal people. The pair developed a friendship, which Waits called Jarmusch his Dr. Sullen, okay? While Jarmusch called Waits the Prince of Melancholy. Waits had devised a musical called Frank's Wild Years, loosely based on Frank's Wild Years from Swordfishtrombones, a track on that album. In late 85, he reached an agreement that the play would be performed by the Steppenwolf Theater Company in Chicago's Briar Street Theater. Waits starred as Frank, whom he described as quite a guy. Grew up in a bird's eye, frozen oven-ready rural American town where Bing, Bob, Dean, Wayne, and Jerry are considered major constellations. He's talking about like Dean Martin and Wayne. Yeah, like that. Okay. Basically, reviews of this play this musical were generally positive. He had initially considered a run in New York City, but decided against it. The songs from the show were recorded from his 9th studio album called Frank's Wild Years and released on Island Records in 1987. New Musical Express ranked Frank's Wild Years 5th on its list of albums of the year. The album was Waits' first collaboration with David Hidalgo, who played accordion on the track Cold, Cold Ground, and Train Song. After its release, Waits toured North America and Europe, his last full tour for 2 decades. 2 of these performances were the basis for Chris Bloom's concert film Big Time. Have you ever seen that?
No.
It's an interesting film. I haven't seen it in a long time. I used to date a girl that was a big Tom Waits fan. So that's how I got it. Yeah. Back in like 1988. Waits continued interacting and working with other artists he admired. He was a great fan of the Pogues and went on a Chicago pub crawl with them in 1986. The following year, he appeared as a master of ceremonies on several dates of Elvis Costello's Wheel of Fortune tour. In 1986, he took a small part in Candy Mountain as millionaire golf enthusiast Al Silk. He co-starred in Hector Babenco's Ironweed as Rudy the Kraut. Hoskins noted that Ironweed put Waits on the mainstream Hollywood map as a character actor. In fall of 87, that's what he is, really. In fall of 87, Waits and his family left New York City and returned to Los Angeles, settling on Union Avenue. He appeared as a hitman in Robert Dornhelm's Cold Feet and then lent his voice to Jarmusch's next film, Mystery Train. Although Waits had provided a voiceover for a 1981 television commercial for Butcher's Blend dog food, he objected to musicians letting companies use their songs in advertising. He said that artists who take money for ads poison and pervert their songs. In November of 88, he brought a lawsuit against the Frito-Lay company for using an impersonator performing Step Right Up in an advertisement for Doritos. It came to court in April of 90, and Waits won the case in 1992. He received $2.6 million, a sum larger than his earnings from all his previous albums combined. This earned him and Brennan reputations as tireless adversaries.
You know what it is? If you're using somebody's music and you don't pay for it, guess what?
Yeah.
You know, again, that's probably like a repto check for all the times that probably the ad was on and stuff like that. They didn't pay him, you know?
Yeah. I just want to bring up an interesting quote. Jack Nicholson was in the movie Ironweed, okay? Yeah. And he had an interesting quote. He says, at the rehearsals, Tom Waits looked like any moment he might break at the waist or his head fall off his shoulders onto the floor. I once saw a small-town idiot walking across the park totally drunk, but he was holding an ice cream, staggering, but also concentrating on not allowing the ice cream to fall. I felt that was something similar to Tom Waits. So the Black Rider and Bone Machine and Alice would be his next 3 records. In 89, Waits began planning a collaboration with Robert Wilson, a theater director he had known throughout the 80s. Their project was the cowboy opera Black Rider. Okay, it was based on a German folktale called The Freischütz, which had inspired Carl Maria von Weber's opera Der Freischütz in 1821. In 2004, Waits realized that Wilson is my teacher. There's nobody that's affected me that much as an artist. Waits wrote that the music and the suggestion of Allen Ginsberg, Waits, and William Wilson approached William S. Burroughs to pen the lyrics to the song. They flew to Kansas, that's where Burroughs lived, to meet with Burroughs and agreed to work with him, okay? Waits traveled to Hamburg, Germany in May of 1989 to work on that project and was later joined there by William Burroughs. The Black Rider debuted at Hamburg's Thalia Theater in March of 1990. On completing its run at the Thalia, the play went on an international tour with a second run of performances occurring in the mid-2000s. In June of 89, Waits traveled to London to play a Punch and Judy puppeteer in Anne Guaida's film Bearskin, an urban fairy tale. He proceeded to Ireland after that, where he was joined by his wife and spent time with her family there. In December of 89, he began a stint as Curly, a mobster's son, at the LA Theater Center production of Thomas Babe's play Demon Wine. Over the next 4 years, he made 7 film appearances. He nevertheless, it's true. And he nevertheless repeatedly told press that he did not see himself as an actor, but only as someone who did some acting.
He was a character actor.
Right. Yeah. There's some interesting ones here that he did. That he played a cop in The Two Jakes, which was the sequel to Chinatown.
I remember that.
Jack Nicholson was in that. He also was in The Fisher King. Okay. He also played a cameo. He played a guy named Monty in Queen's Logic. That's one of my favorite films of the 90s. It came out in 91. It's Joe Mantegna is like a guy who lives in Astoria, and it all takes place in Astoria. And the character Monty is like this guy that just only drives Monte Carlos. And he's like, he just like hangs out in Astoria Park, and he's like just got this, who just wears like a vest and no shirt on, and all that. And you know who loves that film?
Who?
Gina Rizzi.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, because she remembers when they filmed it. We've talked about that movie. Yeah. So he appeared as himself with John Lurie in a film called Fishing with John. He was also in Bram Stoker's Dracula. He played Renfield, remember?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. And he was also in Shortcuts, directed by Robert Altman. Played a drunken limousine driver. Okay. In 1991, Waits and his family moved to the outskirts of Sonoma. Waits' family later relocated to a secluded house near Valley Ford after a bypass road was built near to their first Sonoma County house. So also in 1991, 13 of Waits' 71 pre-Asylum Records recordings were released, but the first time on the first volume was called Tom Waits: The Early Years. Waits was angered at this, describing many of his early demos as just baby pictures that he did not want to come out. The second album, with 13 more recordings from 1971, was released in 93. In April of 92, Waits released the soundtrack album to Jim Jarmusch's Night on Earth, which was largely instrumental. It had been recorded at the Prairie Sun Studios in Cotati. In 1992, Waits stopped drinking, and he joined AA. And in the early 90s, he took part in several charitable causes. In 1990, he contributed a song to the HIV/AIDS benefit album Red Hot and Blue. I remember that. That was a very big seller.
Yeah.
I think REM is on that, right?
There's a bunch of bands on
There's a bunch of people on that. And he also later appeared at Wilton Theater fundraising show for the victims of the 1992 LA riots. In August of that year, Waits released his 10th studio album, Bone Machine. Waits wanted to explore more machinery sounds with the album, reflecting his interest now in industrial music. It was recorded in an old storage studio, an old storage room that they converted into a studio at Prairie Sun. Waits recalled, "I found a great room to work in. It's just a cement floor and a hot water heater." He says, "Okay, we'll do it here. It's got a good echo." So 8 of the album's tracks were recorded with Brennan, his wife. The cover was co-designed by Waits and Jesse Dillon. Jarmus and Dillon directed videos for I Don't Want to Grow Up and Going Out West, respectively. I Don't Want to Grow Up would later be covered by the Ramones on their last album, Adios Amigos. Critic Steve Huey called it perhaps Tom Waits' most cohesive album. He called it morbid, a sinister nightmare, one that applied the quirks of experimental 80s classics to stunningly evocative and often harrowing effects. Waits' most affecting and powerful recording, even if it isn't his most accessible. That's what they called that record. The album's closing track, called That Feel, was co-written by Keith Richards. Bone Machine would win the Grammy for Best Alternative Music Album. Wow. In response, Tom Waits asked Jim Jarmusch, alternative to what? which was always like how I felt about what alternative music was. Waits decided to record an album of the songs written for the Black Rider and did so at the LA Sunset Sound Factory. The Black Rider was released in the fall of '93, and Waits and Wilson decided to collaborate again, this time on an operatic treatment on Lewis Carroll's relationship with Alice Little, who had provided the inspiration for Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. Again, scheduled to premiere at the Thalia, they began working on the project in Hamburg in early '92. Waits characterized the songs he wrote for the play as adult songs for children or children's songs for adults. In his lyrics, Waits drew on the increasing interest in freak shows and the physically deformed. Okay. He thought the play itself was about repression, mental illness, and obsessive compulsive disorders. Alice would premiere at the Thalia Theater in December of 1992. In early '93, his wife was pregnant with their third child, Sullivan. He decided to reduce his workload so as to spend more time with his children. This isolation spawned rumors that he was ill or had separated from his wife. For 3 years, he turned down all offers to perform gigs or appear in films. However, he made several cameos and guest appearances on albums by musicians he admired. In February of '96, he held a benefit performance to raise funds for the legal defense of his friend Don Hyde, who had been charged with selling and distributing acid. Okay. He wrote Walk Away and The Fall of Troy for the soundtrack of Dead Man Walking in 1995, and Little Drop of Poison for the film The End of Violence in 1997. In '98, Island released Beautiful Maladies, a compilation of 23 Waits tracks from his albums with the company, selected by Waits himself. Kind of like his own greatest hits.
Yeah, but this guy, between the movies and covering songs for movies or sound, he's doing good, man.
Very prolific.
You know?
Yeah, very, very, very busy. Despite saying he wanted to take a break and spend time with his family, he's still working. After his contract with Island would expire, Waits decided not to try to renew it. Particularly as Blackwell had resigned from the company, so he didn't have his buddy there anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he signed to a smaller label called Anti, recently launched as an offshoot of the punk label Epitaph Records. He described the company as a friendly place. The president of Anti was Andy Culkin and said the label was blown away that Tom would even consider them. They were huge fans. Waits himself praised the label. Epitaph is a label run by and for artists and musicians where it feels much more like a partnership than a plantation. We shook on the deal over a coffee in a truck stop. I know it's going to be an adventure. In March of 1999, Anti released Mule Variations. Waits had been recording the tracks at Prairie Sun since June of '98. The tracks often dealt with themes involving rural life in the United States and were influenced by the early blues recordings made by Alan Lomax. Waits coined the term surrural, which was a mix of surreal and rural, to describe the album's content. Mule Variations reached number 30 on the U.S. Billboard charts, which actually is the highest showing of any Waits album. The album was well received, being named Album of the Year by Mojo magazine. It won the Grammy Award for Best Contemporary Folk Album. On the characterization of the album as folk music, Waits said, "That's not a bad thing to be called if you've got to be in some kind of category."
Yeah.
I don't know if you call that album folk. I think they just didn't know how to categorize it.
The good music too.
It has some folk attributes, but it's not really folk. Also, in March of '99, Waits gave his first live show in 3 years at the Paramount Theater in Austin, Texas, as part of the South by Southwest Festival.
Oh yeah, that's a big festival every year.
Yep. He subsequently appeared in an episode of VH1's Storytellers. In the later part of the year, he embarked on the Mule Variations tour, primarily in the U.S., but also featuring dates in Berlin. In October, he performed at Neil Young's annual Bridge School benefit concert. That year, he appeared in Kinka Usher's comic book spoof Mystery Men as Dr. A. Heller.
I remember that.
Yeah. An eccentric inventor living in an abandoned amusement park. I kind of remember that too. I don't think I had that comic. I was collecting comics in those days. But did you have it?
No, but I remember the movie, The Mystery Man.
Yeah.
The All-Star Cats. They have one of the guys from
Mystery Man wasn't like
Ben Stiller.
Ben Stiller and Pee Wee Herman was in that, right?
He might have been. It's a pretty big cast.
Was it what's her name? Isn't that the one? It's a spoof on superheroes.
Yeah.
There was a comic book, I think, of it too, though.
It was a comic book. I never read the comic book. I remember the movie.
Yeah. So in 2000, Waits began writing songs for Wilson's adaptation of George Buchner's Wozzeck, which had earlier inspired Alban Berg's opera Wozzeck in 1925. It was scheduled to start at the Betty Nansen Theater in Copenhagen in November of 2000. He initially worked on the songs at home before traveling to Copenhagen for rehearsals in October. Waits stated that he liked the play because it was a proletariat story about a poor soldier who was manipulated by the government. He decided to then record the songs he had written for both Alice and Wozzeck, placing them on separate albums. For these recordings, he brought in a range of jazz and avant-garde musicians from San Francisco. The two albums, Alice and Blood Money, were released at the same time in May of 2002. Alice entered the U.S. album chart at number 32 and Blood Money at number 33, his highest charting positions at that time. Okay. Waits described Alice as being more metaphysical or something maybe more water, more feminine, while Blood Money was more earthbound, more carnival, more the slaving meat wheel that we're all on. Of the two, Alice was better received by critics. Jesse Dillon directed a video for God's Away on Business, but shooting was delayed when the emus, there was an animals that they were using, those little birds, they were set to star. They got eaten by coyotes on the set. Jesus. Now, per New Musical Express, replacements were hastily found in the video for God's Away on Business. The single lifted from Blood Money, one of Waits' two new albums, went ahead a little late. In May of 2001, Waits accepted a Founders Award at the 18th Annual American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, also known as ASCAP, Pop Music Awards, in a ceremony at Los Angeles' Beverly Hilton Hotel. That same month, he joined singers Nancy and Ann Wilson of Heart, as well as Randy Newman, in launching a $40 million lawsuit against MP3.com for copyright infringement. In September 2002, he appeared at a hearing on accounting practices within the music industry in California. There, he expressed satisfaction with Anti, but declared more broadly that the record companies are like cartels. It's a nightmare to be trapped in one. In September of 2003, Waits performed at the Healing the Divide fundraiser in New York City. He appeared in Jarmusch's film Coffee and Cigarettes in 2003, having a cameo with Iggy Pop in that movie.
Yeah, but you were right. Mystery Man, what's Pee Wee Herman? It was Hank Arizona, that girl, Galafazet, it was an all-star cast. It was a movie that came out.
Wasn't Ben Stiller's whole thing, his superpower was he got really mad?
Yeah, it was with somebody. They got really mad. It was a funny movie.
Yeah, it was. One time I was in, just as a side note, in 7B and Janine Garofalo walked in.
Yeah.
We were talking with her. She's like this big. She's short.
Yeah.
You don't see her no more. I don't know what happened to her. In 2004, Waits released his 15th solo album called Real Gone. Waits had recorded it in an abandoned schoolhouse in Locke, Hoskins called the album Waits' roughest and most unkempt music to date. It incorporated Waits' beatboxing, a technique he had picked up from his growing interest in hip hop. Humphreys characterized it as the most overtly political album of Waits' career. It featured 3 political songs expressing Waits' anger at the presidency of George W. Bush and the Iraq War. He said, "I'm not a politician. I keep my mouth shut because I don't want to put my foot in it. But at a certain point, saying absolutely nothing is a political statement of its own." So Real Gone received largely positive reviews. It made the top 30, as well as the top 10 in several European album charts.
Wow.
Also earning him a nomination for Best International Male Solo Artist at the 2005 Brit Awards. In October of 2004, he launched a tour in Vancouver before heading to Europe, where his shows were sellouts. His only London gig saw 78,000 applications for around 3,700 available tickets. Per Bowman, much of Real Gone was built around oral percussion home recordings that Waits made in his bathroom, using his mouth as a human beatbox.
That's pretty funny.
It is. A superb example is the bed track underpinning the hellacious groove of metropolitan vibe that Waits aptly described as cubist funk. In stark contrast, the album's closing track, Day After Tomorrow, returned Waits to his singer-songwriting roots and features a beautiful medley that sounds eerily similar to Dylan's early acoustic work. After several years without film appearances, he appeared as a gun-toting Seventh-day Adventist in Tony Scott's film Domino in 2005. Later that year, he traveled to Italy to appear in Benigni's The Tiger and the Snow. He followed this with a performance as an angel posing as a tramp in Wrist Cutters, A Love Story in 2007. In summer of 2006, Waits embarked on his Orphans tour of Southern and Midwest states. His son Casey played in the band, accompanying him on tour. In 2006, he issued Orphans, Brawlers, Ballers, and Bastards, a 54-song 3-disc box set of rarities, unreleased tracks, and new compositions. Waits described its contents as songs that fell behind the stove while making dinner. The first disc, Brawlers, consists of raucous rock and blues-based numbers. The second, Ballers, of melancholic country songs and ballads. The third, Bastards, of stories, spoken word pieces, and other works not so easily categorized. Orphans, which was the whole thing in total was called Orphans, made the top 10 in several European charts. In 2006, Waits was a guest on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, where he played Day After Tomorrow. In January of 2008, Waits performed at a benefit for Bed-Stuy Legal Services, the House of Justice, a nonprofit poverty law center in Los Angeles. That year, Waits embarked on his Glitter and Doom tour, starting in the U.S. and moving to Europe. Both of his sons played with him on that tour. At the June concert in El Paso, Texas, Waits was presented with the key to the city. In 2009, he released the disc Glitter and Doom Live. He continued acting, playing Mr. Nick in Gilliam's The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, an engineer in The Book of Eli. He was in that film, 2010. That was a post-apocalyptic kind of film by the Hughes brothers.
Yeah, that was Denzel Washington.
I forgot the Hughes brothers directed that film. Wonder what happened to them. You never see them anymore. Waits found himself in a situation similar to his earlier one with Frito-Lay in 2000 when Audi approached him asking to use the song Innocent When You Dream for a commercial broadcast in Spain. Waits declined, but the commercial ultimately featured music very similar to that song. Waits undertook legal action, and a Spanish court recognized that there had been a violation of Waits' moral rights in addition to the infringement of copyright. The production company Tandem Campani Gouache was ordered to pay compensation to Waits through the Spanish publisher. Waits later joked that they got the name of the song wrong, thinking it was called Innocent When You Scheme. In 2005, Waits sued Adam Opel AG, claiming that after having failed to sign him to sing in their Scandinavian commercials, they hired a sound-alike singer. In 2007, the suit was settled, and Waits gave all his proceeds to charity.
Wow.
In 2010, Waits was reported to be working on a new stage musical with director and longtime collaborator Robert Wilson and playwright Martin McDonagh. In early 2011, he completed a set of 23 poems called Seeds on Hard Ground, which were inspired by Michael O'Brien's portraits of the homeless in his book Hard Ground. O'Brien's book included the poems alongside the portraits. In anticipation of the book's release, Waits and Auntie, the record label, printed limited edition chapbooks of the poems to raise money for Redwood Empire Food Bank, a homeless referral and family support service in the Sonoma County area of California. As of January 26, 2011, 4 editions, each limited to 1,000 copies, sold out, raising $9,000 for that food bank. $90,000, for that food bank. On February 24, 2011, it was announced via Waits' official website that he had begun work on his next studio album. Waits said through his website that on August 23rd, he would set the record straight in regards to rumors of a new release. On August 23rd, the title of the new album was revealed to be Bad as Me, and the lead single and title track started being offered via Amazon.com and other sites. In March of 2011, Waits was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame by Neil Young. Okay.
Wow, Neil Young.
Yep. In 2012, Waits had a supporting role in McDonagh's crime comedy Seven Psychopaths as a retired serial killer. Retired. In 2013, he lent his voice to the Simpsons episode Homer Goes to Prep School as a survivalist. On May 5th, 2013, he joined the Rolling Stones on stage at the Oracle Arena in Oakland, California, to duet with Mick Jagger on Willie Dixon's song Little Red Rooster.
Wow.
On October 27, 2013, Waits performed at the 27th Annual Bridge School Benefit Concert in Mountain View, California. Rolling Stone magazine called his performance a triumph. Over the years, Waits made 6 appearances on The David Letterman Show. On May 24, 2015, he sang Take One Last Look on the show's 5th to last broadcast. That was when Letterman was doing all those special shows at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was accompanied by Larry Taylor on upright bass and Gabriel Donahue on piano accordion with the horn section of the CBS Orchestra. In 2016, Waits pursued litigation against French artist Bartabas, who had used several of his songs as a backdrop to a theatrical performance. Claims and counterclaims were made, with Bartabas claiming to have sought and been granted permission to use the material and to also have paid $400,000 for the privilege. But with Waits claiming that his identity had been stolen, the court ruled in Bartabas's favor, and the circus performance was allowed to continue. Although the threat of further litigation meant that it was not performed outside France, and the resulting DVD release does not contain Waits' material. Excuse me. In 2018, Waits had a feature role in The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, a Western anthology film by the Coen brothers. He played a prospector. Also in 2018, Waits provided the recorded narration for performances of McDonagh's play A Very, Very, Very Dark Matter, which was performed at the Bridge Theatre in London. In 2021, Waits had a supporting role in Paul Thomas Anderson's coming-of-age film called Licorice Pizza.
That was a great movie.
Was that good? I never saw that. I heard it was good. In 2023, he joined Iggy Pop on The Confidential Show, where they swapped stories and songs with each other about songs and experiences. In 2025, he appeared as part of Italian public television channel RAI3's The Human Factor series in the last episode called The Last Ride, where he read from his poetry book Seeds on Hard Ground and performed of his new songs. That's pretty much where we're at right now with Waits.
He still stay active. It's amazing. He's at 75 years old, man.
Yeah. I mean, the guy's a kind of like a force of nature. You know, you can't stop him.
Yeah.
I think cleaning up his act a little bit, maybe stopping the drinking in the mid 80s, early 90s, whenever he did that, I think that helped prolong his career. You know, him getting in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is an interesting thing.
Yeah.
You know, his music has been over a wide gamut of different genres, but I think it's interesting. You know, he has not had a new album since 2011's "Bad as Me," so I'd say he's due. But I don't know. I don't know what he's doing. He's a very
album. He might just be chilling.
Yeah, I mean, he seems to be out there a little bit, but it'd be nice. Maybe he's just, not feeling inspired at the moment. I don't know. But he's also up there. I mean, he is 76 this year, so he's up there.
It's probably easy for him to do a scene somewhere, be like the grandpa or something, and they'll pay a bunch of money to go back and do a new album. You make about the same in short time.
Yeah, it's true. All right, so that's Tom Waits. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I know it was a little long, and he's a tough pill to swallow, like I said in the beginning. Yeah. But I think there's you got to give the guy a chance. He's got so many different. He's reinvented himself many times, and there's always going to be something you like, I think.
Yeah.
So, all right, Rob.
All right, man. What a great show, Mike. And remember people to like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time with episode 215. Who are we talking about next, Mike?
We're talking about guitarist Rory Gallagher, probably the most famous guitar player you never heard of.
All right.
At every show, Rob.
We don't get drunk.
We get lumped up.
We'll see you next time.
Take care, people.